And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream, Friday night New Zealand time. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining me. If you're listening live or if you're listening on archive, thank you for being part and supporting the channel. So this week, a number of heavyweight topics that I did want to touch on. We've got the whole Andy Ruiz Jr. sort of transformation, weight loss. There have been some questions about whether it is sort of mind games, and I'll get to that. What also sort of attached to that, what is Andy Ruiz Jr.'s ideal weight? What should he come in at? I've got a number of Patreon questions that I'll get to. We have Joyce and Marco Hook. Looks like they will be taking that fight to Germany. Hook's team winning the purse bid. I've got some news about Eric Molina that I wanted to get to with UCAD. They've given him an extra month on his ban. Martin Bakole, he is fighting this weekend, probably the most high-profile fight of the weekend for the heavyweight division, and of course the Dave Allen and Daniel Dubois situation. And as we go through, of course, there will be getting to the chat and your questions. So I'll just get to the chat now. It's just been going off my list here. So we've got IEB, what up, bro? Hello to you too. Adam Fahey, who is a New Zealander, who I know is living in London. Kia ora to you too. DJ Slicks, impressed with Usyk or not? I'll come to that a bit later. Morning from Nottingham, that's from Callum Bush. Well, morning from New Zealand. Well, I should say good evening, as it is for here. Bipolar Snapperazzi says AJ the landlord ready to collect his rent. Well, he failed last time to collect rent, so I guess he'll have to try and go back for his money. Eddie, hello to you too. Unga, hello. Boxing Source, hello. We've got KK Fahey 83. Good morning from Ireland this morning. Good evening from New Zealand to you. And yes, the All Blacks will be beating Ireland this weekend in the Rugby World Cup. You heard it here first. Okay, so I'll get to my first topic, which is Andy Ruiz Jr. Obviously, there's been a raft of headlines this week with Ruiz Jr. and his weight, the different photos that have not necessarily emerged online because some of them were up on his social media for a number of weeks, but some headlines that were in an interview with ESPN Deportes, which were picked up by others, and then subsequently media have gone to his different social media to go, okay, if he is going to be faster and lighter, let's track his progress. He's been in camp for about 6 weeks now, and obviously you've seen a number of those photos pop up, and it really sort of has gone global. A couple of people that I know were asking me, and they're not even boxing people, they had seen it in regular news websites saying, oh, I saw Andy Ruiz Jr. had lost quite a bit of weight ahead of his rematch with Anthony Joshua. And I said, yeah, it's hard to say how much he's lost because he hasn't told us. He's probably lost some weight, but maybe some of it is a little exaggerated. And what I mean by that is, if you haven't already caught it, I put up a video a few hours ago because in the wake of the video that I did a couple of days ago, which tracked the transformation based on the photos that were circulating, the ones from a social media, a number of fans, eagle-eyed fans, had popped up to sort of say, well, hang on, there's actually something wrong with this photo here. And as it turned out, it was a recycled photo. It was one from back in May 2017. So if one photo is in doubt, then obviously it potentially casts other photos in doubt. And we don't know when some of the ones that have been popping up online, when they were taken. They could have been taken months ago for all we know. And given some of them are paid promotional type posts, it's, who knows when they were actually taken. And the likelihood that some of those photos would be, he would be doing sort of photo shoots and other bits and pieces during his training camp for promotional stuff, it's a little less likely because generally when most fighters get into camp, it's sort of focused on the business at hand rather than some of the peripheral stuff. You try to get that out of the way ahead of going into training camp. So, who knows what Andy Ruiz Jr. will actually come in on fight night at. I think, 268, that was the weight for the first fight. He was clearly heavier than that for the press conferences. Must have been somewhere around 280, 285 pounds, maybe even a little more. He looked like he had been enjoying his time off after beating Anthony Joshua. And certainly when you do the side-by-side comparisons from the September press conferences, and then you have the sort of weigh-in from May 31st, yeah, he was certainly heavier. So regardless of how much weight he has lost or not lost, he is going to be losing some weight just to get back to 268 pounds. If in fact that ends up being sort of roundabout where he weighs in. But I'll drop some thoughts on that, on this whole situation. Do you believe that there is a little bit of mind games at play here, that they're trying to just sort of seed out to the media, just sort of make out that he's going to be coming in super light compared to the first fight? What do you make of the situation? Or have they been caught with their hand in the cookie jar, recycling an old photo? Okay, so I'll get back to the chat there. So in terms of DJ Slick's question earlier before, impressed with Usyk or not, I did cover this in my post-fight to some extent. I actually think that it was a decent performance. Sure, we can all go, oh yeah, it's Chaz Witherspoon, but the guy had been out of the ring for a full year, and he didn't really break a sweat in that fight with Witherspoon. He didn't really struggle. He started a little slow. He just wanted to see what was what in the first couple of rounds, and we saw him turn up the heat from round 3. And as soon as he started to exert pressure, Witherspoon just couldn't keep up, and gradually it ground him down. And this is not, something we haven't seen before. This is sort of Usyk's game. He does do this. The foot movement, the speed, the angles, it gave Witherspoon trouble. And he talked about not being hurt and all that sort of stuff, but clearly he couldn't keep up with the pace. And I did see that he did say that if he had had more time, the outcome could have been different. But really, that is wishful thinking from Chaz Witherspoon, who was, very hand-picked at the last second to fight Alexander Usyk. He could have had 30 years to prepare, as I said in a previous video. Never would have actually troubled Usyk to any real extent, even in his prime, 10 years ago. I don't think he would have had the beating of Alexander Usyk. Okay, we'll get back to the chat here. Okay, so Alex Guerrero says, hi from Canada. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name there. Morning from Houston, Texas. Hello to you too. So yeah, the Boxing Squared YouTube channel. Often people think that it's just fight fans from the UK or the US, but really it is a global sport. And thank you one and all for following the channel and for coming to things like this, the weekly live stream that I've started up recently. I hope you're enjoying the sort of the dialogue and the chat and the different topics that we sort of traverse through these sort of hour and a bit sort of sessions. And thank you for supporting the channel in general. So Scott70 says, don't forget to hit that like button on the way in or out. Yes, please. So Luke says, of Andy Ruiz, black is more slimming. Yeah, and I do think that in terms of one photo that, and you probably, if you've seen some of the photos, you know the one that I'm talking about where he's posing. It was a paid sort of advertisement for Bonobos. Yeah, there was definitely the way he was posing with the t-shirt that would have had a slimming effect to some extent. I did have a number of comments regarding that same photo from a number of different people that thought it had been touched up, photoshopped, that there'd been some little little bits and pieces done there, that some of the shadows and other things related to it weren't quite right. But I'm not an expert on that, but we can definitely say that one of those other photos was recycled. It was a photo from May 2017. So what is your thoughts on Dave Allen? Is he sane? Says KK Fahey 83. And actually that's a topic on my list. We're going to get to that a little bit later, so I won't delve in on that one. But yeah, fair to say that I think it's an uphill battle if he ever faces anyone close to the caliber of Daniel Dubois. So John Otter says, who wins the rematch for you Boxing Squared, AJ or Andy Ruiz? I think that's a sort of question that I won't get into too much in this live stream. I think it's a very competitive fight, and I'm just sort of trying to do a bit of preparation for my sort of 10 things to watch for video. But it is going to be, I believe, sort of in the realm of a 50-50 fight. I still need to think about a few things, but yeah, I'll get into that in more depth on another day. So Callum says, never underestimate the power of the Snickers bar kit. Lee Craft, aka TBK the First, says AJ is king. John Otter, good morning from the UK, by the way. Hello, John. KK Fahey 83 says, it won't happen, my friend. We did that already, so a bit of a problem. Not sure what you're referring to there. Okay, so I just lost my place in the chat there. Fat people can always lose weight quicker, says Bipolar Snapperazzi. Well, yeah, he could maybe Andy Ruiz Jr. might have been able to lose a little bit of water weight pretty quickly, but after 6 weeks, it's not just water weight. He's going to be actually losing some fat through sustained physical exercise. But I guess the one thing about this whole situation is you don't necessarily want it to be, as say Joseph Parker has described it before, and he said it was horrible having to lose 30 pounds for the Joshua fight. He came into camp at about 265. He got down to, I think it was 236 in the end. And he sort of said, look, never again, because it felt like he was on The Biggest Loser, that it was a sort of weight loss camp, and it took away from, aspects that he should have been focusing on instead of trying to get his fitness up, instead of trying to focus on losing weight and, really sort of trying to boil down because he hadn't been disciplined in between fights. Whether that's going to have any effect here with Andy Ruiz, it remains to be seen, but I mean, in context of the rest of his career, Ruiz has always been at a relatively sort of hefty weight for his dimensions in terms of his height and reach. But it must be noted his career low is 246. His title fight was 255 with Joseph Parker, 268 for Anthony Joshua, and the 6 weeks before that he was 262 for Alexander Dmytrenko. So he does really sort of throw up a different number of weights. He's not necessarily terribly consistent with where he's weighing in at. What he'll come in for this weight for this fight, we'll have to see. I was sort of thinking more closer to that 255, that if he was really serious about sort of drilling back down and getting his weight down, but maybe it will be somewhere between 260 and 268. Maybe if that formula, if it's not broken, why bother trying to fix it or try to do something different, because it did work the first time. But I think obviously with a full camp for Anthony Joshua behind him too, preparing for Andy Ruiz Jr., he, given what happened in the first fight, might come out with a different strategy, so that could obviously force Ruiz Jr. and his team to do something a little different. We shall see. I'll get to my second topic before moving on to a couple more questions in the chat. So some Patreon questions. So from Toby, who says, who do you think will win the Beterbiev and Vodzik fight and the Prograis Taylor fight? I did cover the Prograis Taylor fight a week or so ago in the live stream, either last week or the week before. I'm sort of edging it to Regis Prograis at this point in time. I think it's a very competitive fight, arguably two of the top guys, if not the two top guys. You can sort of make a case. At worst, it's two of the four top guys. So I think, it's going to be a very good fight. It's sort of close to a 50-50, but I'm edging it towards Prograis. In terms of the other one, Beterbiev, and I sort of see hear different pronunciations, I should say, Beterbiev or Beterbiev, so I'm just rolling with Beterbiev versus Alexander Vodzik. I think Vodzik is going to win that one. I think the nail is really going to sort of put on an impressive performance there. Beterbiev, obviously very powerful fighter, but at this level, I think the competition that they faced, I think Vodzik's just proven a little more, and I think Beterbiev has shown that he can be hit, and that Johnson fight, he was dropped in that one. So I'm just rolling with Vodzik for that fight. And I forgot that it was actually going to be a Friday night fight, US time. I saw that the weigh-in was today, and because normally it would be those fights would generally be on a Sunday my time here in New Zealand. So it'll be a little treat to have that a day earlier on a Saturday for me, but Friday in the United States. So Right Hook Boxing, he says, do you think Bakole can undo Johnson and get the KO, TKO, or will he get dragged the distance like so many? I won't quite address that in full now, because that is one of my topics that I want to talk about a little later. That's pretty much the best heavyweight fight for the weekend. We've got a whole bundle of prospects that are sort of in different fights in different parts of the world, particularly a number who are in the United States. You've got Damani Rock, he's fighting. New Zealander Patrick Mailata, he's up in Canada. You've got Sonny Konto, he's fighting. And there's a number of others elsewhere as well. But the Bakole and Johnson fight, it shapes as the biggest of the weekend of the heavyweight division, which really, it's like a lot of other weekends at the moment for the heavyweight division. It seems to be it's a real feast or famine sort of mentality when the fights are scheduled. I remembered sort of thinking about this a little while ago. In 2018, it seemed to be there was a decent or a big fight, or at least a half-decent fight every single weekend, and there was maybe 3 or 4 weeks of the year where it was a little bit dry. But in 2019, it really has been a bit of a gulf between big fights in particular, but even just the ones that sort of go week to week. There's been some weekends when there's been basically nothing of note, maybe a few lower level prospects, but yeah, so Bakole and Johnson, that being sort of maybe the most high-profile heavyweight fight of the weekend, doesn't say much about the heavyweight schedule at the moment. It has been awfully light. But I'll come back to some of that a little bit later with the when I get to that topic. But in another question, Right Hook Boxing says, who do you think will get a world title shot first, if any, Dubois, Ajagba or Hrgovic? It's a good question. I think some of that will come down to who is their promoter as well. They're all with basically good, sort of bigger level promoters or promotional outfits. Say Ajagba is with PBC, Daniel Dubois is with Frank Warren, Philip Hrgovic is with Sauerland, and also Matchroom on a co-promotional deal. Although Hrgovic this year has sort of felt like the ugly stepsister after signing that co-promotional deal, he really hasn't had much to sort of shout about in terms of the fights that he's been having. Only had a couple of fights this year, and it's been really nothing of note. There is talk he's going to be out at the end of the year, but we'll see what they end up sort of scheduling him in with. I mean, the opposition, because 2019 sort of has felt like he's lost a bit of momentum and he hasn't sort of nearly pushed on maybe as he might have. But who is going to get a title shot first? Maybe Hrgovic, just because Frank Warren and Ajagba's manager Shelley Finkel, they appear to be seasoning Dubois and Ajagba in a certain way. Hrgovic has a little bit more experience in terms of the amateur ranks. He's more seasoned. He's a little bit older. I think he will be probably closer to a title fight. I think 2 years away, Dubois and Ajagba definitely going to be in title fights. Maybe 2 to 3 years away. They are working their way up. I'm just not sure that Frank Warren or Shelley Fink will push the button on them getting a title shot until they're like sure that it is going to be basically a fait accompli, that they're going to take the title. Sort of similar, you could say, with Finkel to Deontay Wilder, that he was brought along at a certain pace at different levels, step-ups, and when they were sure that he was going to basically win the title, and he did so against Berman Stavern, boxed him over 12 rounds in 2015, comfortably took the WBC title. I think it'll be similar to that. They're going to make sure that the matchup, whether it's for a vacant title or if he becomes a mandatory for Ajagba, I think they're going to make sure that that's going to be something favourable for them. And maybe similar for Daniel Dubois. I mean, they could potentially rush him a little bit quicker, but Frank Warren, given some of the statements, I'm not sure that they'll do that, because he's basically said that Dubois needs more seasoning, and I agree with that. He needs some more rounds, some more tests, but it's becoming increasingly harder to get him some guys to get in the ring with, and we'll come to Dubois and Dave Allen a little bit later on. So Hrgovic, if he can sort of get into Eddie Hearn's good graces and not feel like the sort of ugly stepsister in terms of where he's in that big heavyweight stable for Matchroom, which has got heavyweights in the United States and also the UK. I mean, we'll see what 2020 holds for Hrgovic, but he might be the first to get a title shot, but that might be the earliest. 2021, we'll have to see. Okay, I'll get back to the chat here. Okay, I'm getting way behind, so apologies if you've left a message about 10 minutes ago that I'm only just getting to. Where were we? Okay, so the Celtic Magician says Ireland are going to show the All Blacks why we're number one, Aki or no Aki. That's just pure fantasy. The All Blacks are coming through, Ireland, no hope. Okay, so Eddie says Dillian White's B sample. Touch on this, please. You might have to ask Takashi69 where that is, because I don't think we're going to hear anything about a B sample. From what we're sort of hearing, statements over the last couple of months, they may not have tested it because they relied on the A sample, which he was cleared to fight, which would indicate that they didn't need to rely on the B sample. And if there was some suggestion that there was something in the A sample, but it's been cleared by this panel, this just may be it. But obviously there's a process with UCAD, whatever. We're going to have to see what happens here, because obviously it's dragged on, and the silence has really been the thing that I think has been the killer for fans, because you just don't know what's what. He's sort of been making more sort of noise in recent weeks, Dillian White, about a comeback. He wants to fight, yada, yada, yada. Get a fight in before the end of the year, possibly in December. So we'll see. So Lubac says kia ora squared and kia ora to you too. Adam Fahey says Kiwi or no Kiwi at the Celtic Magician. Yeah, so that's obviously a rugby related one. So if you're not aware, there's something called the Rugby World Cup on at the moment. New Zealand is the two-time defending champions, so that's the country I'm from. The tournament's being played in Japan at the moment, and it's the quarterfinals this weekend. So the All Blacks are playing Ireland. You have England versus Australia. You have Japan versus South Africa, and France versus Wales. So I expect to see that New Zealand will be in the semi-finals, and by the look of it, I think it will end up being England, perhaps. We'll have to see what Australia can do in that quarter-final. So Sean says, what are your thoughts on Hunter Povetkin? And in a recent IFL interview, Eddie said it will be chief support in Saudi. Who wins, and will the winner be in line for a title shot? Well, that's a good fight. I actually think that's a good fight. Right fight at the right time for Michael Hunter. I think he will beat Alexander Povetkin should they make that fight. And I haven't done too much on that at this point because it sort of has been tentative. And remember, this was a fight that was going to get made earlier in the year, but for whatever reason, it didn't. So I'm not sort of holding my breath at the moment, but you may have seen that there was a post on social media from Povetkin's outfit, World of Boxing. He is in training camp now. So we'll have to see what happens in terms of can they get that one over the line. Hunter and Povetkin, they've both said that they want it, but for whatever reason it didn't get made before. But I like the fight, and I think Povetkin at 40, I mean, there were some things in that fight where I sort of thought, yeah, he certainly, and I think it's been obvious for a little while now, he's lost his step, but he's still a very dangerous fighter in those early rounds. But as someone hilariously said in a comment section a while ago, and it sort of stuck with me, Michael Hunter is the fighter that Hughie Fury wants to be but can't be, and I think he would do some things that I think would be enough to get him over the line, not necessarily by a stoppage, but it's possible, but I think he would probably outpoint Povetkin. So and in terms of a title shot, yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that they'll be walking into anything straight away. Sort of seems like mandatories are going to be the order of the day in 2020. Possible unification, but, let's not hold our breath on unification. You have all these guys talking up a big game at the moment. We've had Joshua, Ruiz, Wilder, Fury talking about big fights, big unifications, all that sort of stuff. I mean, what did we see this year? Nothing. So I'm not going to sort of hold my breath for 2020 because this year they've all, let us down in terms of making some of those big fights. So Matthew says, as of now, who would win, Dubois or Hrgovic? You mean fighting each other? That's a tough question. Because certainly either is the best opponent that either would have faced at this point in their career better. And Dubois, he has been improving his jab, but we know Hrgovic has got a good jab too. John says, also Boxing Squared, in your honest opinion, does Martin Bakole have enough power to stop Kevin Kingpin Johnson? I'll get to that a little bit later on. That's one of my topics on my list. So Salty Sally says, howdy to you too. And I know Salty Sally is one of the few female listeners to the Boxing Squared YouTube channel. I was actually going through the analytics for my channel, the other day, and it's actually a 95-5 split. So you're in the sort of small group that follows boxing, obviously on YouTube, that is of the female persuasion. So thank you for joining us, Salty Sally. It's a shame that there's not more sort of female boxing fans, but I guess it's not for everyone. So True 2022 says, hi all, hope you're fighting fit. Right Hook Boxing says, big up Boxing Squared, and I think you guys have been in the chat for about 10 minutes, so apologies for falling so woefully behind on the chat here. And if I do accidentally miss your sort of comment, if you leave one, please don't be offended. Drop another comment if you really want it answered. Sometimes the scroll sort of goes way past and it's hard to find where I was. So I'll try to whip through some comments now and then on to another topic. So Adam Fahey says Ruiz will come in 248 to 255. I'm sort of picking maybe closer to 255. But if he really is shredding the weight, 248 to 255 seems probably a good weight, but we'll have to see. Jens Scans Vitison says, when are we going to get the Brazil versus Martin fight? We have to know who's the best. We'll have to see. I mean, I fully expect that PBC is going to make some of these in-house fights because they've been recycling their heavyweights against each other. So I think there's going to be either Brazil versus Martin or Washington versus Brazil, or a combination of any of those three fighting each other. I think we're just going to see that. When it gets announced, who knows? So Lubak says, I think Hrgović controls Dubois with the jab. Could do. And Hrgović has got a lot of experience, so he would be drawing on that in a fight with Daniel Dubois, and I'm sure he would be trying to keep it long, and I believe he's got the reach advantage in that one, or it's very close at least. But he definitely does have a little bit of height on Daniel Dubois, so he would be punching up. He'd be one of the few guys that Dubois has faced that he's been bigger than, but then again, guys like Razvan Kajanu, he had no problem sort of chopping him down, but that's a very different kettle of fish to Filip Hrgović. So True 2022 says, Ruiz losing weight is like Hercules getting a haircut. You reckon? Okay, so Kobe Tong says, how far do you think Gassiev will go in the division? I think Gassiev is going to be similar to a number of these cruiserweights that come up. I think he will have some success, but it depends on the matchups too. And I think some of the guys that he will have success against will be some of the more plodding heavyweights. I think we already saw the sort of blueprint to beat Gassiev from Alexander Usyk. If you keep him moving and don't allow him to set his feet, he finds it very hard to get off or actually land anything of note and can be easily outpointed. The Lublak says Gassiev has serious pop and might shock a few people. Yeah, it depends on the matchups though, as I say. So Adam Fahey says Gassiev will get undone by the top 10, but he can be a very good top 20 heavyweight in my opinion. Yeah, and I sort of feel about, that's maybe about his lot somewhere, top 10 to top 20, and it does depend on the matchups. Salty Sally says Patrick Mailata fighting out in Canada this week. He is, that's his, I think, what is his third pro fight? It's, as his third pro fight, it's going to be no one good. Or it's not anyone good, I should say. He should get the win there. Importantly for Mailata, he looks like he's been putting in the work in the gym, which has been one of the sort of criticisms, even early in his career, sort of, having his weight in the 280s, 290s, that sort of thing. I mean, that is far too high for a guy who's, 6'4.5", 6'5". So IEB, that photo was so doctored, and he might as well get on a Chinese dating app. Okay, I'd like to see Gassiev versus Chisora. Yeah, that would be a fun fight. I think that's a pretty good matchup, though, and maybe one that Eddie Hearn would make if Chisora is beaten by Price, but that's a big if. So Unga says, Mailata fight live on UFC Fight Pass. Where did we get to in the chat? I just scrolled and just lost about 50 comments, so just go back up. Woefully behind in the comments here. I'm just going to take a quick drink, just a second. So Matthew Goodyear says, does Hrgović have a better jab than Dubois? Well, they've both got decent jabs. It's sort of hard to say. I mean, I guess it depends. It's a very subjective thing, that one. Adam Fahey says, let's be honest here, guys. We love the heavyweight division, but I'm sure we're all frothing for Beterbiev versus Vodzik. Yeah, well, that's one of the bigger fights this weekend, and it is also sort of a shame as well. It's really gone under the radar. It's one of those fights that it's a unification, but very little buzz, and it sort of seems to be a thing with Top Rank. They seem to be able to just not really whip up a lot of buzz for some of their fights. Maybe it is because these are two guys from Europe and the fights in, Vegas. I'm not even sure where the fight is, but maybe that's part of it, that they don't necessarily have a fan base within the United States to help push that a bit more. I don't know. So Jens Scans Vistizin says, we have to see how Gassiev power stacks up against big guys who move less. Looking forward to seeing it. So John Daly says, what's up, Boxing Squared? And hello to you too, John. I'm good. So Callum says, Derek Chisora versus David Price soon should be a good fight. Yeah, I'm sort of in two minds about it. I don't mind the fight, especially at, 2.5, 3 weeks notice. But part of me sort of thinks that Derek Chisora should win this fight. But there's a couple of red flags with the whole sort of training himself and going to corner himself. But yeah, Chisora doesn't really move his head a lot, and if David Price can catch him early with something, maybe he can do something. But as Del Boy, aka Blue Collar Sports TV, had sort of alluded to, David Price is not necessarily a great finisher. He's had a number of guys down on the canvas, like Alexander Povetkin, like Christian Hammer, I think Tony Thompson as well, but had them hurt, unable to finish them. So even if Chisora is hurt, you might be able to weather the storm. And if that happens, the pressure of the way that he fights could wear David Price down, and he ends up folding up like a deck chair in maybe half a dozen 8 rounds. So John says, given Andy's track record, I think there's a very good chance this is misdirection from Mr. Ruiz. Could be that, could definitely be that. Vodzik versus Beterbiev is one of the best fights of the year. Yeah, and it's sort of gone way under the radar. So CG from Dem de la Hillsmon, it's already midday here in Israel. Hello to you in Israel. Thanks for the stream, CG. So thank you for coming to watch the channel, support the channel. Everyone who's here in the chat, we've got about 50 watching the stream at the moment. Thank you for being a part of it, and apologies for falling behind in the chat here. A lot of comments coming through, and it doesn't help. I'm sort of whipping in between different topics too, but we'll try to catch up. But I will get to my next topic now, which is Joe Joyce and Marco Huck. So that purse bid has been lost by Frank Warren, so that means that Hook's team, they will be able to set the date and obviously the venue, promotional control, so that will likely be in Germany. And that's not so much what I wanted to talk about, so we've canvassed that this week. I'm not sure that it being in Germany necessarily has a massive effect on the fight. I do think that Joyce is going to win that one. I think it'll be a bit too much for Marco Huck. But the other thing that has sort of been not necessarily mentioned too much is Frank Warren had actively been talking about doing a doubleheader at the end of the year between Daniel Dubois and Joe Joyce featuring on the same card, and he talked about potentially building towards those two to a fight at some point in 2020, and that has been something that Joyce's manager Sam Jones had not shied away from, saying they like that fight for Joe Joyce. But obviously Marco Huck's team winning the purse bid, which I think I hadn't seen the actual amount, but I had been informed by Adam Fahey, who's in the chat here, it was something like about £420,000 or something like that, something to that effect, $420,000. I haven't actually seen the figure myself, but I guess that's kind of besides the point. Frank Warren has lost that opportunity to preview Joyce in front of home fans, UK fans, to try get a bit of buzz and interest for a fight potentially with Daniel Dubois later in the year. I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to come off, that they're going to end up, because I think some people would sort of see that as a fight where it would be Frank Warren really trying to feed Joe Joyce to Daniel Dubois. And I know Joyce, he would sort of back himself to win that fight, but Frank Warren at this point is all about Daniel Dubois, and being the next heavyweight champion. He's only got eyes for Daniel Dubois, and I think we've seen that in some of the behaviour in action in 2019. As soon as Joyce joined that stable, Nathan Gorman was fed to Dubois in an instant, and I think they would be looking to build up sort of Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois until the point they can make some money from that fight, have Daniel Dubois fight Joyce, and then move on to a heavyweight title, maybe in 2021 or 2022 or something like that. Okay, so Adam Fahey says got Vodzik 8-4 UD with possibly a knockdown. Yeah, it could happen. He's got some decent pop. I think Vodzik's been a guy that when he has sort of stepped up and fought some of the tougher guys, he's sort of risen to the occasion. There's been some other fights where he's looked a little bit lackluster, but obviously that performance against Adonis Stevenson, albeit Stevenson that was clearly coming to the end of his run, he looked like he was that fight before against Badu Jack, that he was vulnerable, but Vodzik, that was a great performance by him to take the belt. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in here with Artur Beterbiev. So Lubak says, I think Ruiz has superior stamina to AJ and will be too quick in the rematch. Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends how it sort of plays out in some of the tactics from Anthony Joshua. I think we kind of have an indication the way that he's likely to play it is he'll try to keep it long, really try to make that jab a weapon, try to stop Andy Ruiz Jr. from getting to the inside. And when you think about those first couple of rounds in that first fight, Ruiz didn't necessarily, he wasn't just getting to the inside at will. And he was the one that sort of first took a couple of big punches, obviously the third round, and dropped. So, they'll be reviewing the first fight and what they can sort of tweak for the second and game plans. But I'm sure, Ruiz and his team, they will sort of be anticipating some of these things. They'll have plans on plans on plans as well. So Lubak says Karpensi hurt Vodzik. Well, there is scope for Vodzik to get hurt by Beterbiev, very big puncher. And he often does find a chance to land too. As Unger is saying here, I wouldn't overlook Beterbiev, stellar amateur career beating both Vodzik and Usyk. True 2022 says 39 watching, only 5 likes. Come on, peeps, we can do much better than that. And if you can smash that like button, please do so. That'd be much appreciated. Rev James C, Fury vs Strowman, your prediction? Don't care. It's a great promotional tool, but I won't be watching. Ever since I was a kid and I found out it wasn't real, I just sort of, went off wrestling. Lubak 77, Beterbiev can box as well as bang. Yeah, it's going to be a tough fight. It will be a tough fight. I'm just leaning towards Vodzik. Callum Bush, 26th October 02 Arena, London, Derek Chisora versus David Price. Yeah, that fight is happening on that date. Unger says, my prediction, Fury cut and Wilder fight off. Well, we'll see. They've talked about £12 million. There was one report saying £12 million for Fury for that fight. I can't see it being that much. Some people have been saying, Saudi royal money, yada, 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 that sort of thing. But when you consider that the top wrestlers, and you can, Google this yourself, the top earning wrestlers, those top guys are getting less than $20 million a year. Most of them, the top stars, are getting somewhere between 1 and 10. But they're going to bring Tyson Fury in for a fight with Strowman. And Fury's not necessarily a massive sort of star in the United States, not to the extent, say, Mike Tyson or Floyd Mayweather was when they had their fights on wrestling. $12 million, that seems awfully high to me. So Adam Fahey says, I personally see it very much like Taylor Buranchek at Unger, with the boxer winning. Beterbiev can box a lot better than given credit for, but think Vodzik can get it done. Yeah, possibly. So Georgina says predictions for David Light versus Broadhurst. Well, yeah, that's a decent step up. At the moment, I think David Light hasn't proven that he's sort of past that sort of, Australasian sort of level. So I think that is a good test. And if he can beat Broadhurst, he could maybe go on to sort of, contend at fringe world level. I like that one for Light. I think Adam Fahey here is saying Light by stoppage. I could see that. So True 2022 says, if you're only a boxing fan and don't love UFC 2, it must be a bad year. 2 greater fights in the Octagon this year. Well, that is one of the things that I think has been appealing for sort of, I don't want to say boxing fans, but just more sort of fight fans in general, is vehicles like the UFC and other sort of similar ones where there is competitive matchmaking all the time. It's not as fractious in terms of all the different promotional outfits and different bodies and bits and pieces, yada yada yada. It kind of is, the best fights being made, and you're getting 1 or 2 big fights a month. Whereas in boxing, it's not necessarily always like that. And you might get a world title fight in boxing, but it could be deemed a mismatch, So, that's one of the things that hurts boxing. And boxing, I've spoken about this before, boxing does it to itself. If only we were getting bigger and better fights more often, it would keep the momentum going. At this point, it sort of seems to be that boxing lives off the coattails of a few fighters who captivate a broadly casual audience. And there's not really too much left for the hardcore boxing fans who follow the sport week in, week out, outside of those sort of big, maybe say half a dozen fighters. So Stanley says, Eddie Hearn seems convinced either IBF or WBO will have to be dropped by winner of Joshua Ruiz, who fights Usyk Pulev for the vacant belt. Well, it really depends who wins, but I'm pretty convinced. I've been saying for ages that, mandatories are going to become a problem. And I always get met by a bunch of comments, unification takes precedence over mandatories. But we haven't had some of these there was no mandatory challenges this year. And they were talking about having, a couple of mandatories, either the end of last year or this year, and it never happened. So the IBF has already sort of weighed in and said Pulev gets a shot before the end of May. So there is going to become a problem. And if Anthony Joshua wins, I think he will probably defend out of the two, because the IBF was his first. I think he would fight Kubrat Pulev. It's possibly an easier fight than Alexander Usyk, and that might be the way that he's advised anyway, because if he wins and there's a belt dropped, you could see Usyk facing the next highest, which would be Joseph Parker in the rankings as of today. And then obviously those three fighters are all in the same stable, so the winner could go on to have a unification with Joshua. And if Andy Ruiz Jr. wins, I think he'd be dropping the WBO just like Joshua, simply for the fact that there's this whole sort of freezing out of the WBO by PBC at the moment. So I could see Andy Ruiz Jr. dropping that belt if it's a choice coming down to it. Okay, so where were we? So Lubak says Wilder was fighting middleweights and light heavyweights well into 25 fights. Yeah, but I guess this is the thing that people love to talk about Deontay Wilder's record, and the fact that he had so many sort of low-level fights early in his career. He didn't have a terribly long amateur career. He sort of exceeded expectations, went to the Olympics, got a bronze medal, but he needed a whole bunch of work, and I think he's not, even now I think we'd argue he's not the finished product. The technical side of things is not great, so the footwork and other bits and pieces can be a bit all over the place, and he gets excited, he starts windmilling and other bits and pieces, but he's got undeniable power. He's underrated on the defensive end, and he finds a way to land that right hand. So, but some of his early record I think is held against him to some extent, but let's face it, he rose to where he was and had the sort of correct seasoning that Shelley Finkel obviously was looking for him to have, and he ended up getting a title shot and winning it, albeit for a vacant belt. And sure, we can criticize some of the opposition since then until 2018, but the fact is he was worked into a position, he got the belt, he's held on to it, and he still has it. So in some regards, he's had great matchmaking, and he's been terrifically managed in the way that he's managed to get where he is, considering some of his sort of frailties and the technical skills that he wishes that he would have. But that power is undeniable. On the other hand, I think at this point there is no leeway. I mean, some of these fights, I don't want to see him facing Luis Ortiz. We didn't need to see that fight, but it's the one we got. It's not a terrible fight, but it is a retread fight. Adam says WBO next available is Joseph Parker at number 4. I believe that belt will be the one dropped by the winner. Yeah, that's just exactly what I went through. What I will do, I'll just bring up you won't be able to see this, but I will just get to my email. There's a interesting story by UCAD, and I didn't do a video on this, but what I'll do is I'll go through it now. So Eric Molina, so you may recall he fought Anthony Joshua at the end of 2016, and a while afterwards there was found to be a substance in his system. I believe it was dexamethasone. He'd actually got some vitamin B12 over the counter, hadn't bothered to check it, and effectively his defense when he was sort of, there was an adverse finding, his defense was ignorance. He said, I didn't know, I'm sorry, but I didn't know that there was anything on it. It's vitamin B12, it was an injection, I didn't realize there was something in it that he shouldn't have been. And effectively, because he put up such a limp defense, that the book was thrown at him, and he got a ban in the UK for 2 years. And they had said that it was in their initial stuff, look, this is from All Sport, it's a ban of 2 years, and by the time that they'd announced it, sort of 6 months had been backdated, but it was to the end of October this year. But what's been happening in the interim is Eric Molina has been fighting and earning money as a heavyweight boxer outside of the United Kingdom. UKAD, although that they've tried to say this is a ban from all sport, they have no real jurisdiction to enforce the ban overseas. And some of you who've been following the channel for some considerable time will remember that I had covered some stories where Eric Molina was flouting the ban. He'd had a fight, I think it was in Poland. He was due to have a couple in Texas. This was, I think, at the start of this year. And I'd got statements from UKAD and tried to push them to, can you actually get him, off these cards? Can you stop him fighting? And ultimately they came back and said no. So effectively it was only a UK ban in reality. But they've given him an extra ban. This is an extra month, and this is because he sparred with Joseph Parker. So this is kind of a sort of dot joining type thing, but effectively because Parker was fighting Dillian Whyte in 2018, and because he was licensed by UKAD to fight in Dillian Whyte, and Parker was sparring Molina, who was banned because of the dot connection to a guy who was fighting in the UK. Molina has been given another ban. So I'll read out the press release. It's quite brief, but it just kind of, I thought, geez, they've really been trying to get him, and they finally managed to nail him on something. But in reality, can they stop him fighting elsewhere? No. It's just an extra 1 month ban. So it says, boxer Eric Molina has been handed an additional 1 month suspension from all sport, having breached the anti-doping rules during an ongoing period of ineligibility. Mr. Molina tested positive for the presence of the prohibited substance dexamethasone following an in-competition test. After a fight with Anthony Joshua on 11 December 2016, he was subsequently issued with a 2-year period of ineligibility starting on the date of the provisional suspension, which issued 28 October 2017. So they didn't actually go public till about 6 months later in May 2018. So the ADR Article 10.12.1 states that an athlete who has been declared ineligible may not, during the period of ineligibility, participate in any capacity or assist any athlete participating in any capacity. Information obtained by UKAD showed that Mr. Molina had, during his period of ineligibility, engaged in 6 sparring sessions with professional boxer Joseph Parker in preparation for his fight against Dillian Whyte on 28 July 2018. Therefore, Mr. Molina has been issued with an additional 1 month period of ineligibility effective from 28 October 2019 to 27 November 2019 inclusive. And there's a spokesperson, Nicole Sapstead, the UKAD chief executive. Anyone issued, I won't go through that. Anyway, so I mean, they've been looking for a way to obviously punish him because he's been flouting the ban and sort of proven that they can't actually, it's a wet bus ticket in terms of outside the United Kingdom. But obviously, because the circumstances fighting Parker, they managed to snag him on that one, well, so they believe. Not that it'll have too much bearing on Eric Molina's career, because it's unlikely he's going to fight back in the United Kingdom, right? Okay, what do you make of that situation anyway? Let me know. So I'll just get back to the chat here. So Lubuck77 says Ireland will cause a shock on Andy Ruiz levels. Okay, that's pure fantasy there, Lubuck. Unga says, if AJ loses, wouldn't be surprised to see him get the WBO shot against Usyk. I guess it depends really if they hold him at number 3 in the rankings, because he is number 3 currently, ahead of Joseph Parker, Tyson Fury at number 2. But Tyson Fury unlikely to have a shot at the belt against Usyk because he's likely to be fighting Deontay Wilder, if in fact he is going to be fighting. We'll have to see what happens there. As people have been pointing out, there could be all manner of injury he could sustain in an event in the WWE. Even though it's scripted and choreographed, wrestlers suffer some pretty nasty and sometimes season-ending or even career-ending sometimes. It's a pretty physical sport. Maybe fake in terms of, the results and it's scripted, but they can really get hurt. So Georgina says, even Jerome Pampalone, I think that's how you would spell if he's going to be something great when he turns pro. John Daly says, Stanley, I'm not so sure that is what Eddie really believes. If AJ, when he fights Pulev and then Usyk fights another warm-up, the AJ Usyk would be AJ's 2020. Well, it really depends on the the WBO to some extent, because it's not completely over to the boxer or his promoter. And remember, the WBO was going to be ahead of the IBF, but the IBF, that hasn't had a mandatory since Carlos Takam, which was basically 2 years ago now. That was what, I'm pretty sure it was October 2017. So, they're pretty strict on having their mandatory. So I think they would say, look, they've given plenty of leeway and not had their belt defended by a mandatory for 2 full years now. So Adam says, Unger, what's happening with David Naika? He failed a test or something. He was turning pro, then went dark. No, he was training with the Barrys. Well, actually, I just saw on Facebook before he's having some sort of fight in Hamilton the end of this month, or maybe it was the end of November. I think there is a tournament that he can qualify for the Olympics next year, but there's some sort of amateur night happening in Hamilton. So Punch quote, formerly Triple H 1200, Vodsic be pumping that jab on his toes. Bertabiev cuts the distance with short power shots. It's going to be a rough finish for him. God, beat it late. Yeah, I mean, and it's a really good unification, that fight, as we were talking about early, just because it's going to be competitive. I don't think you can sort of categorically say one guy beats the other and that it's going to be a comfortable fight. It sort of is very close to a 50-50. So True 2022 says Wales versus New Zealand final. I'm sorry, you're going to have a bad weekend, True. I think France is going to knock Wales out of the Rugby World Cup there. So John says, Stanley, if Ruiz wins, Hearn will press the mandatory and force Ruiz to drop the WBO because Fox can't outbid DAZN. I think some of this will come down to the sanctioning bodies to some extent. But yeah, money talks, and sanctioning bodies are certainly open to that. So I think if Joshua wins, he's more likely, if they were trying to work some sort of deal, as someone was suggesting before, to push the WBO out, get the IBF out of the way, maybe that would happen. We'll have to see. I'm not sure that Andy Ruiz Jr., even if he'll be a much bigger star, both of these guys will, whoever wins. So, but at this point, Andy Ruiz Jr., like a lot of other heavyweights, doesn't generate money. There's a small sort of cabal of heavyweights and boxers more broadly that sell tickets to a big level and, bring a lot of money in. And at the moment, Andy Ruiz Jr. isn't one of those. So maybe the sanctioning bodies, depending who it is, they will always follow the money. As we know, they love to clip the ticket on the way through. Okay, I'm just falling behind the chat here. I see people having a lot of conversations. Losing my place here. Actually, I'll just have a quick second, just for a drink. So we've got 55 here in the chat. Thank you for joining me for the weekly Boxing Squared live stream. I've enjoyed doing this sort of format the last month or so. It's been quite good. So I will just get back to the comments here before getting to my next topic, because I did want to touch on Martin Bakole and Kevin Johnson, and also the Dave Allen versus Daniel Dubois situation. Because I think, Dave Allen calling for that fight, and now he's sort of trying to squeeze Frank Warren on the money. It's quite comedic in part, but also I don't really want to see that fight get made. That's kind of, a fight that I think ends one way and not in a good way. Where did I get to? Okay, found my place again. So Jason says, who would win, Chisora or an antique telephone box? So Muhammad and Bruce Lee says, hey Boxing Squared, you made the font bigger on the screen, top man. Yeah, I did figure that out. There was a way just to sort of expand it. It was quite easy in the end, so apologies for the smaller font in previous weeks. I managed to fix it before ahead of last week, so hopefully you can read that. And my analytics tell me that about 70% of people that come to the channel watch videos, or maybe it's a case of watch or listen on their phone. So I'd be interested to know just who's here. Are you listening on a phone, or are you listening on a tablet or a PC? Let me know. How do you watch the screen, or is it a case of you just listen, as I'm sort of doing a normal video or whatever? Because I try to cater to both in terms of, you have to tell the story with words, but the pictures obviously do add something to it as well, and video, of course. So I'm just seeing a few people leaving comments here. So Big Dan says phone, Watcher says laptop, Leon says phone, Prophet says phone. Can see the screen, phone every time. Yeah, I guess it's quite interesting. We all sort of fall into our own sort of patterns, and I think of just internet usage in general, that sort of stuff. Because I'm a tablet person. Most of the stuff that I watch online, I'm on a tablet. If I'm in the car, for example, or I'm traveling somewhere, it's definitely the phone. Yeah, a lot of people are coming in with phone. And one of the others, so Alan says he's on TV. There's a number of people that watch through, as my analytics tell me, through gaming consoles too. So I guess that sort of shows that sort of integrated nature of some people's setups. They've got their TVs with their gaming consoles. They search the internet or YouTube or whatever through, their TVs, etc. So yeah, I mean, I'm a bit sort of a dinosaur on the sort of technology front. I mean, it takes me a while to sort of set up anything, but it's always interesting because I think, you get into your own habits about what you do. And one of the other things, and maybe this is just because I think Apple is quite big where I am in New Zealand. So a lot of people have Apple phones, but there's a huge amount of people that watch on Android and Android phones in general. So it's I'm sort of getting off topic here, but I was just interesting things that pop up in the analytics about where people are watching, how they're watching, how long they're watching for, and all that sort of stuff. So on average, I think for these sorts of live streams, it's somewhere between about 10 and 15 minutes. So I appreciate if you've anyone who's come along for even 1 minute. Thank you for joining the Boxing Squared weekly live stream. Got a little bit off topic here, talking about analytics and how people sort of consume their media, etc. But I'll get back to the comments. I'm sort of got two comment boxes. One is the one that's the live one. That's how I've been reading the recent ones, and the one that I'm woefully behind on at the moment. What I might do is get to the next topic, which was Martin Bakole and Kevin Johnson. So Bakole had been due to face Gabriel Nguema from Spain. And I think, to be fair, most people have never heard of him. It's not exactly a great fight. And then he's pulled out for whatever reason. Never really got the definitive reason on that one. But they've drafted in, Kevin Johnson at short notice. And I think this is a better fight. Bigger name, certainly, than Gabriel Nguema. And this is an opportunity for Martin Bakole, especially, I think, because it's of the heavyweight division. He's sort of got the most meaningful fight, I think, of the weekend, or at least the most high profile. If he can actually do a number on Kevin Johnson, and I believe this is only over 8 rounds, this is this card that's in Newcastle, he could really make a bit of a statement, because Bakole in late 2017, 2018, he was starting to, I'm just trying to think, when was the year? When did he lose to Michael Hunter? Was it the end of 2017? It might have been, actually. But regardless, prior to the loss to Michael Hunter, his name was bubbling up a huge amount of steam. He was getting a lot of hype behind him. There are all sorts of sparring stories coming out, that he was apparently battering guys in gyms across the UK, struggling to get fights. And he sort of seemed to be one of the next big things that would be happening in the heavyweight division. And then Martin Bakole takes on Michael Hunter, and really does have an off night. He's finding fresh air most of the time, loading up, just can't really tag Hunter the way that he's trying to. Hunter, high risk sort of strategy, darting in and out of range and picking Martin Bakole apart. And Bakole did look a little bit bereft of ideas how to sort of respond to what Hunter was doing. As we know, he got injured later in that fight, had a shoulder issue, seemingly wanted to quit on a stool. I think it was the 9th round, either before that or after. It was between one of the rounds, and he gets stopped in the final round, and the sort of air went out of the balloon very quickly after that. I think a lot of people who were really hyping him up just sort of decided actually they'll walk away. So this is an opportunity for Martin Bakole to go in there and put the hurt on. And we know that Kevin Johnson, uber negative against guys that really represent any sort of risk. He was just fighting a week ago against Alexander Zorkozy in Germany, so this is like a week turnaround for Kevin Johnson. He wasn't in great shape for that fight, but it was probably one of the more aggressive performances that I've seen from Kevin Johnson in recent times. But I think that was because Zorkozy didn't really represent much of a threat, or he didn't believe he did. He got caught a few times, and in the fourth round he was sort of staggered to some extent, but he overcame it. And predictably, it was a sort of decision to Zorkozy. So it could very well happen like that. We could end up seeing this one devolve into some sort of Martin Bakole just really unloading everything that he can, like Daniel Dubois did, but ending up, not really being that effective, and Johnson sort of getting out of there and decision loss, but still managing to stay on his feet. It could very well happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think if he was to knock Johnson out, it's a massive statement. It really would be. And I think that would sort of really breathe some light back into his career. And I did see an interview with Eddie Hearn sort of saying that perhaps Martin Bakole and perhaps a fight with Filip Hrgović, that could be something that could happen down the line. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of heavyweights in that matchroom stable. They really need to get some of those guys in against each other. And I'm just seeing Unger saying Zhang, Zhili Zhang and Sergey Kuzmin. So I don't think that's official yet, but it's looking like that will happen. And there was a couple of other names. I think Huey Fury might have been on that card too. So Ruben Guerrero, and this is in the live chat, sorry to the about 100 comments that I haven't got through yet, is Johnson too old for a knockout to be that significant? Well, I've certainly been talking about in the last 6 months or so, there's a diminishing sort of amount of credit you can get against Kevin Johnson now. I mean, he's certainly well on the decline now, but part of what he does now is just, he's super negative. He just completely shells up, and it's a survival effort, and it can end up in a bit of a stinker. Remember that Daniel Dubois fight? It was horrible. It could end up being similar to the Martin Bakole one. But then again, maybe he's got the pop to sort of break down and stop Kevin Johnson. Maybe he will be able to sort of batter him and get him out of there. And if he does, it's a massive, massive statement. And I think, Team Bakole, they'll be looking for that stoppage. And remember, if it's only over 8 rounds, maybe he will be, more willing to really let his hands go and go for broke, especially in the, maybe some of those early rounds or, towards the end. If it was over 12 rounds, maybe they might sort of have a go and then sort of back off. But over 8 rounds, he might be more willing, and he seems to be a bit fitter. His stamina is better now. Maybe they will be able to make Johnson pay. Okay, I'll get back. So what do you make of that fight, though? What does Martin Bakole need to do to stop Kevin Johnson? It's a very hard thing to do. Kevin Johnson just so hard to knock out. Okay, getting back to the chat here. So Sizzler10 says, if Joe can give Usyk some trouble, don't you think he would get knocked out by the big boys? Joe Joyce didn't give Usyk any trouble. Usyk schooled him. That was from the World Series of Boxing. Yeah, Usyk really did put on a masterclass. New Phone Hoodus says Parker versus Usyk. Yeah, well, Joseph Parker's spoken about before that he would like that fight, but his management, they don't. David Higgins, when he was promoting Parker, and he's now sort of his manager, not just his promoter, he's never really seemed to be keen on that. It's all been about the money for the fight, and I think that's because I don't necessarily think it's a great fight for Joseph Parker. I think, because they have a sort of similar skill set, but I think Usyk is just a little more polished on a few things, and I'm not sure his gas tank has the sort of question marks over it that Joseph Parker's does. And if it ends up becoming just a straight boxing match, I think Alexander Usyk might have the edge there. Joseph Parker, not necessarily a big, puncher. I think people, I've seen so many comments over the past year or two that Parker just needs to do this, that, and the other to increase his power or knock guys out. I just don't ever see it happening that way. I mean, he was marketed as a guy who was knocking people out early on, but that was more to try and build his profile. But as soon as he stepped up to world level, the knockouts dried up. So I don't necessarily think Joseph Parker would be knocking out Alexander Usyk. I definitely think that one goes to a decision. So Parker versus Otto. I think Joseph Parker wins that one. Otto Warren is a good fighter, but he, at the end of the day, even though he cut Fury over, his right eye, two nasty cuts, really wasn't able to do enough to get him out of there. It was a perfect opportunity. I just don't think he would be able to. I mean, Otto Warren, I don't think punches hard enough to trouble Joseph Parker, who's got a good chin, and I think Parker probably outpoints him. So Callum Bush says Wilder versus Parker, the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Well, they tried to get that fight made, 18 months, 2 years ago, but they said there was no money in it, so I don't ever see that fight getting made. I don't think Deontay Wilder's just going to be voluntarily picking Joseph Parker. They've got their own plans. I mean, if Parker was in the PBC stable, well, that's another story. You could have a conversation about it, but he's in the wrong tent, and these things matter. I mean, that's why when people are sort of throwing out a whole bunch of Matchroom fighters saying they should fight Daniel Dubois, it's just, at this point, it's never going to happen, especially if they're going anywhere in their career. I mean, they're not going to, Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren aren't going to be doing either any favours. Just have a drink, just bear with me. So, Janice says, Eddie Hearn is signing all these new heavyweights just in case AJ loses. Smart. I don't think it's a case of Joshua losing is the reason he's signing all these. It's because they're expanding. The simple fact that he is, helping DAZN, and he's got all these cards that are going to be in America, and they've obviously got obligations to fill in the UK too. They needed to expand the stable. They needed to bring in a lot of other guys, and some of these are on co-promotional deals. He just got a lot of cards to fill, and he needs to put heavyweights on them because people want to see heavyweights. But it's also a case, I believe, that they've got to start making some of these matchups. So in the case of if Zhili Zhang and Sergey Kuzmin fight each other in Monaco, if and when that's announced, that's a good case, because there's a good fight, because there's a case to be made to say that a lot of these guys haven't been fighting, nearly good enough opposition on the way up. And that sort of level fight, for Sergey Kuzmin, who's just coming off a loss to Hunter, he didn't look good in there. Zhili Zhang, who's 36 years old, he was a Olympic medalist from 2008. He's got a very padded record. It's kind of right fight at the right time for both those guys. It's sort of, to prove, who is going on to the bigger fight. And if Kuzmin can't beat Zhang, well, it's hard to see where he would go. And for Zhang, if he loses to Kuzmin, retirement may not be too far along. I mean, sometimes it only takes one or two losses, and then some of these guys just really do, if they've had all these padded records and it doesn't pan out, they sort of really start selling their somewhat good record, and they end up being journeymen very quickly. I'm thinking a guy like Mikhail Wallace, who, until he fought Christian Hammer, he had a Zoe, he loses, and then in the space of a few more months, he's fought Tony Yoka and F.A. Jagba, and basically, if they had a Jagba fight, he only got $20,000. That's just a small amount of money, I would have thought, for the risk. So Ruben Guerrero says, decent fight for Joe. Huck is a bit too long in the tooth. Yeah, that's part of the reason that I think that Joe Joyce is going to win. I think that Marco Huck is past prime now. I mean, if this was Marco Huck from, say, 5 years ago, I think it'd be a much more competitive fight. I just think that Joe Joyce will do what Joe Joyce does, even though he's slow. I think volume is, people perceive his punches to be slow, but he throws a lot of them, and that to some extent is his defense. But that fight with Jennings, the one thing that really interested me out of that was that body shot that hurt Joe Joyce early on. I think a lot of guys, especially coming into a fight now with Marco Huck, he will be looking for that body shot in the same sort of region, thinking, can we strike lightning here with a body shot? Because you could make an argument to say that Bryant Jennings should have been jumping all over Joe Joyce, who was... I don't think Jennings really realised how hurt Joyce was from that shot. Okay, so EJ Boxing Live says Mr. James Ali Bashir, attacker, has been arrested. I think he's been charged, hasn't he? That's Clarissa Shields' brother. Yeah, that wasn't a good situation, but that was a pretty volatile situation. And when I was watching, that I think many of us were in the aftermath, going to some of those big YouTube channels that covered the weigh-in and such, I was wondering, where's the security? It all seemed so lax. It was just, people on different teams that seemed to be separating people. But I was wondering, where was the security? I mean, it clearly was a tinderbox ready to go up in flames, but what happened? And a shame for Clarissa Shields, because obviously she's taken a lot of criticism in the wake of that, because obviously the connection to one of her entourage sort of bashing James Ali Bashir. His behaviour, that was not good on his part, but, provoking an assault like that, it wasn't called for. Should have been a much better setup for that card in Flint. There should have been more security, and they could have diffused that and done better there, I think. So Ruben says Joyce's style might be wrong for Daniel. To me, some of it, because what I'm saying of Daniel Dubois is I think he's getting better and better. And remember, he's only 22. He is still developing. But I think if you watch some of his fights from, a year ago, for example, and even going back to 2017, I think it's clear he has been getting progressively better. And I think that was illustrated in the Nathan Gorman fight. Clearly, that fight, Gorman was the more fancied boxer coming into that, and I think many people thought that Gorman would try to outbox Daniel Dubois, but Dubois, using his height and his reach, and in particular using the jab, he was able to outbox the boxer. But not only that, beat him up, got him out of there. That was a very impressive performance. So I don't know if he's wrong for Joe Joyce, but some of it may come down to, because Joyce is 33, or is he 34 now? He was due for another birthday, I think. I mean, they need to be 2020's got to be a big year for Joe Joyce, because I think they've tried to get him into the big fights, the right fights that they believe he needs. But it hasn't, remember, he's been with David Haye, he's been over in the States with PBC, now he's over with Frank Warren on a co-promotional deal. He's been bouncing around, he's had 3 different trainers. There was Ishmael Salas, obviously Abel Sanchez, now you've got Adam Booth. It sort of seems to be they want to do everything fast. I actually like this Marco Huck fight. I think this is another sort of right fight at the right time for Joe Joyce. And I've just got Tupac Shakur saying why in the chat. Part of the reason I think 2020 needs to be a big year for Joe Joyce is age. Just because most heavyweights seem to decline after the age of 35. That their peak years are before 35. Sure, heavyweights can still be competitive and have good fights after the age of 35, but generally there is a lot of heavyweights start to decline after 35. That seems to be a kind of a bit of a rule of thumb, that there is a noticeable decline. You don't need to put the exceptions to the rule, because there's guys like Klitschko who held on, and obviously there's going to be some guys like that can have some success, but sustained success at the top level after 35 in the heavyweight division isn't necessarily guaranteed. Most of it is before the age of 35, and so some of these guys who are in their early to approaching their mid-30s, it really is rubber hit the road time for some of these guys, especially if they're sort of at that prospect / fringe contender level stage. And it's hard to work your way into a mandatory position. So I think there is there could be a few challenges ahead to get Joe Joyce to a world title fight, just the positioning of the way things stand with the belts and other bits and pieces. But in some ways I could see Frank Warren pitting Joyce against Dubois, but I think for a lot of people they would probably favour Daniel Dubois in that one, but it's more when Dubois is ready for that fight. Okay, and apologies if I'm about 10 minutes behind on the chat here. We've been going for an hour and 14. Geez, no wonder I was getting so thirsty. So we'll try to wrap it up in the next 15 minutes or so if I can get through the comments and other bits and pieces. But I'll go to my last topic, which, speaking of Daniel Dubois, is about him. Dave Allen and Daniel Dubois. Is this a fight that you would like to see? Obviously, Dave Allen travelling to Leeds, trying to get a meeting with Frank Warren. I want that fight with Daniel Dubois, doing all sorts of interviews, talking that up, that he's now right. He's sort of, just a few months ago, Dave Allen was stepping away, or maybe it wasn't even a few months, maybe it was a month ago, saying he was stepping away from boxing. He gave away his Instagram social media account, didn't want to be on there anymore. He talked about health issues and that some of them had been going for quite some considerable time, not just in the weeks or months before, but considerable time, health issues and etc. Some of the stuff that we've heard from Dave Allen before, the stuff from round about June 2018, where he talked about having headaches and he was thinking about quitting the sport after having that fight with Tony Yoka, and but all of a sudden he's now well. I don't necessarily like this fight for Dave Allen. I think most people don't. There's an argument to say, look, it's his career, he can do what he wants, but I think at the same time, if Dave Allen hadn't been displaying some of these, traits in public and some of the statements that he's made, and it's all there on the record about, he's struggled with his mental health and, all these sort of associated issues. I think this is why people are saying, look, this is just a step too far. He just come off a fight against David Price, who I think many people would pick Daniel Dubois to be relatively comfortable. Price dominates him and really beats him up in the process, and now he's talking about just a little while later wanting to go and off that loss, facing Daniel Dubois. I mean, to me, I'm just like, man, this guy's got a death wish that he wants to hurt himself. I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all, and I don't believe that this is a fight that should be made. And now it's doesn't appear that it will because of money. Dave Allen threw out some offers apparently in terms of what he wanted. They matched it, and then apparently decided that he needed more. So who's to say what's gone on there? We've seen different statements from both sides about that sort of thing. He's got a certain amount that he wants for December, but even if he does, they agree to it, they overpay him or whatever, it kind of is almost, we'd be watching a mismatch. I mean, are they actually, even though Frank Warren is sort of saying that they would, gladly take that fight, do we actually as fans really want to see that? Do we want to see what is going to be, I think maybe you could sort of, it's akin to some of these fights that Dave Allen was in earlier in his career. I mean, remember Luis Ortiz beat him up over, I think it was 7 rounds. Just beatings that he's been taking in the ring over his career. What's this doing to him? Clearly he hasn't been right, and I don't think everything's just cleared up overnight. And he's been saying he has trouble telling the truth. These statements that he, even in that interview, one of the interviews I saw over the weekend. So why would I believe he's all of a sudden all good? I think people like Dave Allen, they want to see him do well, but I think there's a certain level that he's been proven that he can operate at, and jumping up to face one of the hardest, heaviest handed guys in the heavyweight division, it's not going to end well. Just my 2 cents on that. So Callum Bush says Patrick Day passed away, RIP. Yeah, that really was sad. Obviously there's been a number of deaths in 2019 in boxing, and I'm sure this is going to reignite some of the ban the sport or change the sport. It really is another reminder that it's a very dangerous sport. I mean, and I guess this whole stuff with Dave Allen, I mean, this is, he was pulled out of that fight against Price, and they had to take him to hospital. He didn't look in a good way heading out of the arena. What if Daniel Dubois goes in there and just punches him, repeatedly hard in the head to the point where something bad happens? And we're all, we're saying now, a lot of us, this is a case that this is a fight that we shouldn't see, and it's all too obvious that he's going to take a hard beating in this fight. Sure, he might be able to sort of try to throw some of his shots that he likes to throw, that big overhand right or the shot to the body. But Daniel Dubois and his trainers are going to be wise to that, as David Price was. David Price, he knew what was going to be coming. They were very rehearsed sort of shots that he likes to throw. Price could see them being set up from a mile away. I don't know. I don't like it. I hope that fight doesn't happen. But I guess that's the question for Daniel Dubois. Who's he going to be fighting in this next year or 18 months or whatever, in the seasoning phase? Who's he going to be fighting? Because it's becoming increasingly hard to get him the meaningful fights or the rounds that he needs. There might end up being that there's going to be some sort of just step that he takes from where he has been operating effectively up to world level. I don't know. I mean, some of these guys, it's very hard to get rounds. I mean, maybe they should be looking to bring in, F.A. Jagba, he fought Ali Aaron Demiresian. Maybe Frank Warren should be looking for a guy like Demiresian. That's sort of some of the level that Dubois has been fighting, similar sort of opposition to that. I wouldn't mind that fight, but it's becoming very hard to get him the sort of competition that he needs to push him, to give him a few tests and challenges, some of the things that he's going to learn from in the ring. Like one of the best fights that happened in Dubois' career, which was arguably his worst performance, was that fight against Kevin Johnson, because he looked one-dimensional. He was bereft of ideas after just throwing certain combinations. He didn't do enough to try break him down and take him out of there. And it became apparent he'd learned from that fight and the fights afterwards, because you saw a lot more punch variation. He'd gone back to the drawing board and worked on things, and I think he was better for that experience. So sometimes being taken the distance and not looking fantastic, can teach you some lessons, and I think we saw that for Dubois. But outside of, guys like Dave Allen, there's not too many guys that can stand up to punishment. And the ones that do, Dubois already fought one of them, Kevin Johnson. But it also becomes an equation. I don't want to see that fight against Dave Allen. I just think that's something, that's a bad accident waiting to happen. So Caledonian Wolf says, good morning from Scotland. We haven't seen much from AJ. Do you think he's taking Andy Ruiz more seriously this time? Well, I think they would have been taking him seriously the first time, as serious as he could have, but I think there's an argument to say that there was certainly one eye on the next fight, and obviously a short notice opponent. In hindsight, they probably should have just, when Miller popped for those drugs, those PEDs, they probably should have pulled the pin on that, but I think there was too much invested for his American debut on that date at Madison Square Garden for them to pull out. And I think in hindsight, with about 5 weeks notice, maybe they should have just pulled the pin and reset. But you can't get that one back. But obviously they would have taken a lot from that, and some of the preparations and the game plan is certainly going to be tweaked for the second time around. So True 2022 says, got a funny feeling Price will KO Chisora with an uppercut. He's got a good uppercut, and I think if Price is going to get a knockout, it's got to be when he's fresh. It's got to be early. I think, Chisora has been hurt early in fights before, so if he can catch Chisora cold, maybe he could get that upset, because it would be an upset at this point. So EJ Boxing Live says, Tyson Fury cashing out by doing WWE. How's that going to help him beat Wilder? Well, I don't necessarily think it's anything to help him beat Wilder. I think it's just a vehicle to help build his name, for the simple fact that his profile isn't where it should be. He spent 2019 fighting people that nobody was interested in. The casual sort of appetite for Tyson Fury against people that they've never heard of is not great, even with hardcore boxing fans. No one really wanted to see that. The fact that the Otto Wallen fight was more competitive than expected, and the cuts and the drama, well, that made it, better than it otherwise could have been. But in reality, it was still a mismatch, and he shouldn't have been facing Otto Wallen. And some of this nonsense that Otto Wallen is a top 10 fighter. I mean, give me a break. So True 2022 says if he catches him like he did Povetkin, Del Boy won't get up. Was that a left hook that Price caught Povetkin with? I mean, the ropes did the job there to hold him up, but it was counted as a knockdown. It was a good shot. So EJ Boxing Live says Joyce should fight Usyk. I'm sure Joyce would want that rematch over again. One of the things in Joyce's defense, he was still very raw back in 2013, and arguably still a little bit raw now. He obviously came to boxing late. He was in his 20s. He'd been in the United States. He'd been on a scholarship there for athletics. He was doing cheerleading at the university. If you haven't seen my prospect video on Joe Joyce, which is the rise of Joe Joyce, I've got a series I've done. I haven't managed to do any lately because of work and other bits and pieces, but over that Christmas period I'll try to get a couple more done. I've done F.A. Jagba, Filip Hrgovic and Joe Joyce. Very interesting sort of backstory for Joe Joyce, and doing a fine arts degree. He's actually quite a talented painter. But that would be one that I'm sure he would want to get back, because Usyk, who at that point was a highly seasoned amateur, he obviously and he'd won, I believe, was it 2012? Yeah, he'd won the gold. This was 2013 when they met. It really was a case that Joyce was out of his depth at that point. I'm sure he would do much better in the rematch, but that wouldn't necessarily change the result. So Adam says, tell you what, if I was Joyce, that Dempsey from BT would be dragged to the gym for sparring after his pointed question and disrespect. Yeah, that really was quite disrespectful, because insinuating that Daniel Dubois is the only one fighting anyone of note, Joe Joyce had literally just come off beating Bryant Jennings, which is, for me, the best name on either's resume. And now he's going to be fighting Marco Huck, who's another good name on his resume. I don't know what that guy was thinking. I was thinking, is this just meant to be drama? And I think some of it also comes back down to everyone, say BT, Frank Warren, they have their lot thrown in with Daniel Dubois. They're looking for down the line. They believe that Daniel Dubois is going to be around and be a very successful heavyweight and a champion for a long time. So it's all going to be about Dubois all the time now for BT and Frank Warren. If Ruiz gets any faster, I'm hiding under my pillow, says Jason Landis. Yeah, I'm not necessarily thinking we're going to see, the flash out there. He's got fast hands. He might be able to get a hair quicker, losing a little bit of weight in that sort of excess rubble, but I don't think he's going to get so noticeably quicker. But though, losing the weight, that might help with his feet. That might help with his footwork. I think one of the things is that Ruiz has got very fast hands, but sometimes it's hard for his feet to keep up. So Mick Boswell says Parker versus Usyk. I just mentioned that before. So Angus Young says, Boxing Square, did you see Parker healthy now, back into the gym? I did, and I have seen some people criticising Parker for being at the club and all that sort of stuff, but it did make me think, well, because initially I was thinking, well, it's a bit of a bad look. He's out partying with Floyd Mayweather and whoever else they were with. But then I sort of thought, well, he doesn't have a fight scheduled now. But there have been some people saying, oh, well, this proves he should be fighting Derek Chisora on the 26th of October. But if you lose 3 weeks of your training camp, which is what we're hearing it was, I don't think you're going to be in any position, if you're running an 8-week camp and you lose 3 of it, that really does sort of completely scupper your plans. But I will be doing a video in the next week or so, just sort of a couple of thoughts on the what next for Joseph Parker, because obviously there's been 2 times where he could have fought Derek Chisora, I should say, and it hasn't happened. So we'll have to, Derek Chisora isn't necessarily mentioning Parker anymore as the what next. He's mentioned Jarrell Miller, and I think Chisora is a good vehicle for, a good fight for Parker to get back in the mix of the bigger fights, but Chisora may deny him that opportunity because he feels like he's been mucked around. I think we should consider that possibility that Chisora is going to be like, nah. So, Unga says Top Rank not promoting Vodsik as lineal. Isn't that what they do nowadays, or is it only if you don't have a physical strap? So, True 2022 says Callum Bush, yes, he's passed away yesterday, very sad. Oh, okay, of Patrick Day, yeah, very sad. Condolences go out to Patrick Day, his family, and obviously a very sort of, that could have wide-ranging sort of effects on those who were in the ring, you know, his opponent, but also the referee, and could they have, there'll be a number of people questioning, could they have done things different? So Unga says Kovalev v Bivol or Canelo. Oh, okay, that's in response to Adam Fahey asking if Kovalev loses to Canelo, he will get the Bivol fight on his own. Yeah, Dmitry Bivol is an interesting character because I've watched all his recent fights, and just my opinion watching it live is, yeah, he's good. Yeah, he's technically, you know, does the right things. But it's kind of like, I'm just like, what am I watching here? It's like, I just feel like my pants are being bought off. It's, you know, I'm just kind of like, yeah, Dmitry Bivol, you know, so what? And this is some of the dilemma that some of these fighters sort of fall into. And Bivol in particular, after the sort of fight, he was asked a question about, could you have sort of stepped it up? Could you have taken some risks and that sort of stuff? And effectively, his answer to a large extent was, well, I've still got the belt. That's the main thing. And yeah, I mean, I can see his point. And if he loses the belt by taking unnecessary risks, well, then he's sort of a forgotten man. And but it sort of seems to, and it's the sort of same situation with Tevin Farmer. You know, with all these fights with guys that we don't necessarily want to see him against, and they're not terrific performances. He doesn't have a massive profile, all that sort of stuff. And then Tevin Farmer says he doesn't care what fans think. Well, fans do pay your wages. I mean, guys like Farmer and Bivol, for example, if they can't put some excitement into their game, and I don't know, it just sort of, you know, for me, Dmitry Bivol, as someone sort of had pointed out somewhere, seems destined to be, you know, an undercard sort of support guy for the remainder of his career if he can't actually manage to put some oomph into what he does. I don't know, it's got to be tough, but, you know, I came away from that Bivol fight thinking, yeah. So, AA Boxing and Blunt says White has announced he's fighting the appeal process. Okay, I'm not exactly sure where things are up to with White's case. I'm not sure what is this new AA Boxing and Blunts, or is this just the same old that there's something happening with UCAT at the moment. So I'll just scroll down here a bit, slowly catching up to the chat here. So 64 in the chat, so if you can hit that like button, as Adam Fahey says, please do so, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you one and all for joining the stream. We'll try to get to through the rest of these comments, and I'll try to wrap it up. And is there anything else that you want me to touch on? Because I've gone through, I think I had 8 different topics, and my Patreon questions, we've whipped through them. Where are we? So George Michael says, Wilder's dedication to the sport is unrivaled, always training, always fighting, no drinks. Yeah, you can't question that. He's one of these guys that has lived the life. I mean, maybe sort of his dedication to the craft in terms of learning the technical elements, maybe that hasn't been as good as it could have been, but you can't question, you know, his dedication to staying in shape, and you know, he stays ready so he doesn't have to get ready. And sometimes he doesn't even have a fight schedule, and he's got sparring underway and other bits and pieces. Unga says Wilder used to fight 8 times a year in the early years. Shame a few others don't do that now. Well, it's a shame some of the top guys are only fighting once a year. I mean, how do you manage to build a fan base and an audience if you're only fighting once a year? And some of these prospects are only fighting 2 or 3 times a year at the moment. It's just not enough. Some of these guys need to be fighting 5 times a year. And credit to Daniel Dubois. If he gets out in December, that's going to be, 5 times for the year. The opponent's not always the best, but, when you consider he's a prospect or, sort of transitioning into that fringe contender stage, some of the guys, if he's with the activity at that stage of his career, I don't mind if there's 1 or 2 lemons in there because, he is trying to stay active and busy. So Adam Fahey says Molina getting pumped up the bum by UCAT. Okay. That's in reference to what I was reading out earlier with the press release with UCAT adding another month onto his ban, which was due to run out on the at the end of October. That was for his failed test against Anthony Joshua. So he's flouted some of the conditions of that and being caught a month added. So Leon says, do you think the WBC will call white as mandatory? They've been putting Wilder vs. White as an option for fans' choice on social media. White is doing interviews again, and Dees went on a rant about White. Well, I guess it really depends what comes out, with this whole process with UCAT. That's part of it. If it comes out and it looks good for White in terms of an explanation that sort of stacks up, the WBC, if it gets all the information it requires, because effectively it's sort of said it suspended the mandatory and it suspended the interim title until they've had adequate information. But they may have had some of that now as this process has worn on, because there has been a cooling of, White's come out saying some stuff and the WBC's talking about White a bit more, and White's been wearing a WBC hat and some social media things and yada yada yada. So maybe they are going to look at that, but when they sort of say, I thought this was quite funny, and I think we talked about this last week on the live stream. They had White in for a fight for May or something, and I was thinking, if Wilder is fighting in February, he's not going to be fighting in May. I mean, as it is, he's going to be fighting November 23rd, and then apparently February 22nd, 2020, 3-month turnaround. I mean, to me, because he hasn't done that for years, I'm a little skeptical that it happens. Maybe that fight with Fury doesn't happen for February, and if Fury does get injured to any extent in the WWE, maybe that'll push it back, and maybe that sort of opens the door for White. I don't know. It's with the heavyweight division, it's a very wise man, not wise, or a foolish man, I should say, to predict anything more than about 1 month out, because it's like shifting sands. It just changes all the times. So Eddie says Wilder needed those 35 plus low level fights. Yeah, well, I mean, he did. I mean, I think compared to a lot of other boxers, I think Deontay Wilder in his early stage, very wild, very raw. He needed a lot of those fights. And often that's held against him, that he's fought a lot of those guys. But that's part of the reason, and has been even until recently, that people question his ability beyond the right hand, because some of the opponents haven't always been good at the championship level opponents. Until 2018, it was just sort of, guys that necessarily either didn't deserve a shot, or, they're sort of very hand-picked. I mean, I know Deontay Wilder likes to say all the adversity that he's had in his career, all this sort of stuff, but he's had a very protected sort of career, in the sense that his management has really looked after him in terms of the matchmaking, right up until the title fight, getting the open shot for the belt, having those fights with Molina, Areola, Spilker, Dorper, Washington, very hand-picked opponents that, guys Wilder should have been beating. But, he is starting to put the names on his resume that he needs now if he wants to become a Hall of Fame fighter, the likes of Luis Ortiz. There's a draw with Tyson Fury, but he's got more work to do. So is White underrated, says George Michael. He's got wins over Parker, Rivas on resume, win streak of 10. I don't think he's underrated. I don't necessarily think he's overrated. I think most people consider him a top 10 fighter. At the moment, I mean, putting aside the situation that he's sort of had with him, because you consider he's got those 2 wins against Chisora as well. He's got a win against Helenius. There was the Brown win, a win against Dave Allen. There's a bit of meat on his resume. He probably, I think his status within the top 10 is probably about where he, deserves to be. So, Giannis says, Yo Squared, tell us more about these nasty New Zealand spiders. Are they so common? Well, Joseph Parker was in Las Vegas where he was apparently bitten. So he wasn't having a training camp in New Zealand. He was in Vegas with Kevin Barry. Barry, his trainer, lives in Las Vegas, so it was whatever was native to there. But New Zealand doesn't really have too many sort of nasties in terms of snakes and spiders and all that sort of stuff. There's, a few spiders that are a little bit venomous, like whitetail spiders, and there's a few that can sort of make you feel a bit ill. But in terms of the real bad ones, I mean, that's more Australia. If there's anything that's going to really do you over, it lives in Australia. Crocodiles and all sorts of spiders and snakes, and yeah. Where are we? So Unger says, lived in Las Vegas 25 years, plenty of nasty bloody spiders there. Yeah, can anyone actually tell me what sort of spiders they do that are native to that area? So as he says, Molina doesn't care about UCAD really. Nah, not really. He's obviously proven that he can get away with flouting that so-called ban from all sport. It really isn't worth the paper it's written on outside the UK. So George Michael says Wilder was managed superbly, not rushed. He's got confidence in his tools. Yeah, I mean, he's had a he's been brought along at a pace that suited where he was at in his career. He wasn't rushed, and he was put into fights that he could win earlier in his career, and arguably even in his championship career for much of it. So Unger, did you get bitten? So Unger says no, but my kid did, 24 hours in ED. Okay, I'm just trying to work out where I was in the chat here. Just one of these things, sometimes you do a little bit of scroll down and you miss about 3 or 4 pages. There's a lot of comments. I didn't realize how many I've missed, I should say. Just a second, I'll just try to get back to where I was. Okay, I can't find where I was, so I'm just going to have to pick it up here. So Will Magic Man says Price has never lost against a fellow Brit yet. Well, there's always room for a first time. I think David Price, he's got a chance in that fight, but it has to be a knockout, probably in the first half of the fight. Otherwise, he might get worn down and taken out by Derek Chisora. So old chicken legs will not fight anyone unless 40 plus or no punch power, says Alan Bennett. So Tupac says, oh, this must be about something else. Geez, I'm not really sure where Okay, apologies if I've just missed your comments here. So we've got Big Boys Boxing saying Boxing Squared live stream. Boom. Thank you for joining me. In the early days of the channel, Kiwi Box, aka Big Boys Boxing, now he helped me out a lot. The whole sort of YouTube navigating the whole sort of intricacies of it, sort of not rich money to get all the decent names for a super series. I think if we do get a World Boxing Super Series at heavyweight, we're going to have to check our expectations about who would really be in it. And I think there would be as I did a video a little while ago, a mix of prospects and sort of contender level guys that aren't necessarily in line for a title shot, but they want decent money. So Matt says Triple D is top 20, but the problem will be that all the better fighters will want top money to fight Daniel Dubois. Yeah, for the risk, totally. Daniel Dubois is going to find it very hard to get some of the names that he wants now, or Frank Warren I should say, because the money, they'll be demanding all sorts of crazy money. They'll be paying way over the odds to get guys to fight Daniel Dubois, as Dave Allen is trying to do right now. So Will Magic Man says, subscribe to Boxing Squared and hit the bell icon for all notifications. Yes, please. Where were we? So Watcher says, okay, it's talking about another channel. Matt says, Boxing Squared, you got a feeling Wilder knocks out Fury in the rematch? Yeah, I'm leaning that way actually. I think it's the same equation, Can Wilder land? Can Fury outlast Wilder without getting taking one on the chin? The fact he's taken a couple of big punches by the likes of Wilder and Wilder late doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me at the moment that Fury could go all 12 without taking something. And I'm sure Deontay Wilder, who's feeling very aggrieved, he's been making all sorts of comments that Jack Reese was, used favoritism, he was caught up in the moment and gave Fury a long count, yada yada yada. I think he's going to want to close the show, but I guess interesting that in that fight, that 12th round because I did watch that back a little while ago, Fury really did well to evade that initial sort of onslaught after that knockdown, a very heavy knockdown. And looking back on it, I was surprised that Deontay Wilder, who was a pretty decent finisher, wasn't able to get him out of there. So Lou Buck says, I'd like to see Dubois fight guys like Martin, Brazil, Hammer in 2020. Frank Warren did actually mention Christian Hammer in terms of an opponent for Daniel Dubois, that for the end of the year, for December, it just wasn't on. But a guy like him who's a bit tricky and slippery, I wouldn't mind that fight. I think that's a decent level for him to be getting some experience at, and I think he would beat Christian Hammer handily enough. Maybe even stop him. Okay, I got to fast forward down the chat here. I just see one from AZ who says, what's up with Char versus Bryan? Well, that's anyone's guess. I mean, supposedly the fight was meant to have happened by now. Seemingly about to happen in early November. There was an agreement that Manuel Char had sort of some stuff he'd put up on his Instagram, a fight for November 2nd in Kinshasa. God knows what happened. Okay, I've lost my place in the chat. I don't want to keep going on about it, so I'll just go right up to where we're up to. So John says a Prospects heavyweight series would be good. It would, but I guess it depends what sort of stage at their prospect, because guys with less than 5 fights, it's not too much in it for them necessarily. Someone who's approaching 15 fights, that might be held a bit more allure, but some of the top prospects, if there's not big money involved, maybe they wouldn't be into it. It's kind of like this heavyweight Ultimate Boxer that's coming up in the United Kingdom in December. I know a lot of people have been criticising that with the level of opposition, but I was looking at it and thinking, actually this should be relatively competitive with the names that they've got there. It'll be a good night of boxing. I mean, it's not necessarily any of the top guys. There's a lot of journeyman style and unproven prospects in there, but it's going to be a good night. As knockout format. That's the sort of stuff that I like. So Timothy Thomas says, BS third time of asking, how much more can Peter recycle? Hughie Fury is supposed to have changed the style totally. Can he be a champion? Apologies to anyone who has been asking questions. I've just been inundated with comments. It's hard to keep my place, and sometimes I scroll down and it just goes past dozens of comments, and it's hard to go back to where it was. So what I will say about Hughie Fury is, some of those comments about that Peter Fury makes, it's kind of having a bit of tired ring about it at the moment. When he's stepping into some of these fights, he's not letting the right hand, he's either not letting the right hand go enough or in the way that Peter Fury wants it to, or he's only relying on the right hand, and he just can't seem to find the right mix of offense and what he wants to do in there. He sort of seems to be a bit betwixt and between. some of the style that he had earlier in his career, where he was, on his bike. I mean, say that title shot against Joseph Parker, for example. It's just not going to work for him. He just can't seem to, he's not going to get decisions that way, but by being completely negative and not throwing enough. But then when he was fighting the likes of Kubrat Pulev, just, that wide arcing right hand was all he had. Sure, there was the cut, but, I mean, what excuse were they going to... There was no excuses after the Alexander Povetkin fight, and it was more of the same. He didn't really do too much. So, I mean, I know everyone... people like to say he's only 24, but I'd say actually he's had a birthday. He's 25 now. But I'm not seeing any real development. It sort of seems to be... He's stagnated. He can't seem to... It's not clicking. That's why I sort of think, they keep wanting to rush him back to a world level and a super tough fight. Maybe they should just, really have a year where they're working through a little bit of a lower opposition, given he's had 3 losses at world level now. So the Kissim says Huey Fury should quit boxing or fight at cruiserweight. I think, what was he, 220 something, 222-ish, somewhere around there for Povetkin. Could he get down to cruiserweight? Maybe. I'm just not, that might be a backward step. So Joyce, Jagba, Hrgovic, Kovnatsky, Dubois, Hunter, Bakole, Huey Fury. Okay, I'm not sure what that's in response to, but... Oh, okay, a prospect heavyweight World Series. Well, I'm not sure some of those guys, like Kovnatsky, he's not a prospect anymore. He's a contender and waiting for a title shot now. PBC will just keep him sort of warm, waiting for a title shot to be the next guy in their stable, ready for when an opportunity presents itself. Say, for example, if the Fury fight fell through, I think they'll probably end up making Wilder versus Kovnatsky. Depends what the WBC would do with Dillian White. Dubois, so Hunter, yeah, he's not a prospect. He is, in my view, after that Kuzmin win, he's a contender. But if he fought Alexander Povetkin, and that looks like it will be made, and beats him, well, he's sort of title bound in the next year or two. So Adam Fahey says, Tim, he's a wee way behind, so your first time asking will be coming. I'm probably about 20 minutes behind on the chat, but I've caught up now because I lost my place and I've just gone to the front of the chat, and I'm already falling behind in this one as well. If any one of the top guys just attack Beyonce from round 1, he'll hit the deck and be KO'd, no problem. It's easier said than done because, they could walk straight onto a right hand. True 2022 says Fury's been overtraining. Yeah, that possibly could be part of it too. That could have been part of, because you may recall against Tom Schwartz, he looked very slick, but then against Otto Wan, just in those first couple of rounds, although he looked to be sort of just seeing what was in front of him, he didn't look as sort of sharp. So there could be something to that, and the training every day or almost every day is part of his well-being now. So there could be an argument to say that because he needs to be doing this for his mental health, he might be putting in too much training, and this could be, having a sort of knock-on effect. I mean, I'm sure Ben Davison is monitoring that, but I mean, it's out of his hands if Tyson Fury goes back to wherever he is and goes for another run, or does some weights in the middle of the night or whatever. So Timothy says, BS, why does Chisora appear so relaxed for the replacement fight with Price, religion, or easy food? I don't know. I mean, he's friends with David Price. I mean, maybe there's just not the animosity there that there would have been with the likes of he was trying to create some sort of beef with Joseph Parker and, G himself mentally up for Parker and saying all sorts of trash. And, we saw the stuff at the first press conference and asking for more money and making a big deal. I think he's just sort of resigned to the fact it is what it is, and he believes he can probably win this fight. And I think he is the favourite for it, and justifiably so. Timothy says, unless he lands a big on them first, anything's possible when his hands are flying. Is that Wilder? And yes, Big Boys Boxing, I did catch up. So Feroz says, what happened to Spider-Man Parker? Haven't heard anything from him. Well, they're looking to maybe have him in a fight potentially at the end of the year. But I did hear Eddie Hearn say there just might not be a spot on a card for him. It might be a case that he gets squeezed out because they're sort of, all booked up. Because remember, he was going to be on this card. This would have been his last fight for the year. Ruben says, does Parker need to leave Barry? Never happen. Maybe he does need to, but they are sort of in lockstep, not going to happen. So CMDR says Parker back in training. Yes, he is, and he was at the clubs as well. Boxing Squid, Zhang versus Kuzman, who you got? I want to say Sergey Kuzman, but he looked very poor against Michael Hunter. And Zhili Zhang is the bigger guy. It's got to be, Southpaw versus Southpaw. I don't know. I think it kind of is almost I don't want to say loser leaves town type fight, but in terms of progression to the next step or maintaining at a certain level in the division. I mean, Zhang is 36 years old now. He hasn't been active for whatever reason. He is a guy that really has got an extremely padded record. He was actually, I think, he was meant to be on that card last year, I think, facing Ustinov. But whatever since then, he's basically done nothing. He needs to get a wriggle on, and if he can't beat Kuzman, he's probably limited options for the what next. So Georgina says, what happens to AJ if he loses again? Where will he stand? Well, he's never going to have any trouble getting fights, and probably the fights that he wants, just because he's a marquee name and he makes money, and his opponents will get paid for fighting him. But I guess they will look to regroup, and if Joshua, he may take some time out, but if he recommits himself, I'm sure he will be in the year or two after a loss if he loses to Andy Ruiz Jr. Because of the money involved that he can generate, I'm sure that he wouldn't be too far away from a title fight. So Boxing Squared, so says Jaho, Tony Yoka is fighting Christian Hammer in December. Well, that will explain why Frank Warren couldn't get him to fight Dubois in December. So as he says, we finally get to see Zhang tested versus Kuzman in Europe too. If he can get a visa, because that sort of scuppered him a year ago. So Timothy, that was why Michael Hunter ended up standing in last year and took Ustinov out in, 9 rounds or so. Okay, there's a lot of chat within people here. Okay, I'll give it another couple of minutes because we're almost at 2 hours now. Where's the time gone? That's just flown by. So we've got 56 people in the chat here. So I want to thank everyone for coming to the channel, and I'll just try to address the last couple of comments. Okay, I think most people are talking to each other, so I will round it out there. So thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream for another week. I'll be back next Friday. Have a safe week, and wherever you are in the world, have a good day or a good night, and we'll be back here next week. Thank you very much.